Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. Today we're going to be jumping into some more SCP universe goodness here. We're going to be continuing the admonition series. This is going to be a long video. This one is the video itself is an hour and 45 minutes long. It's SCP-6488 Eighth Commandment by the Exploring series. So I might have to split this up into two parts because of how, it's a pretty long video. So we'll see if I can get through it today in one video or not. But regardless, this is what we're going to be checking out here. So links will be down below as always in the description to the original video without my commentary interaction into the Exploring series channel. So if you would please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video as we go through it, be sure to go over to the Exploring series channel, hit the like on this video, and if you would also do me a favor, if you enjoy his content and you haven't hit that sub button on his channel already, please do me a favor of doing so and showing the man some love. He makes a lot of great content for the SCP universe as well as others, 40k, etc. So go over there and just check out all of his content and see what else is over there that you might have interest in. But with all that said, let's jump into this. If you'd like to join us as I do these reactions live with my YouTube members, there is a join button underneath the video as well as a link in the description. So if you've been around the channel for a while and you would like to take your sport to the next level, check that stuff out. But with all that said, let's get into this video. So again, this is SCP-6488, the Eighth Commandment by the Exploring series.
SCP-6488, Eighth Commandment, Part 1. In the 1999 film The Matrix, Morpheus asks the protagonist Neo, "What is real? How do you define real?" He says that if you're talking about what you can feel, smell, taste, and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by the brain. The simulation hypothesis, which proposes that all of our existence is in fact a simulated reality, has grown more and more popular in recent years.
Sure.
Whether or not that hypothesis bears any weight is best left for some other type of video. But one question related to it is, if we are living in a simulation, and we somehow manage to prove it, how would humanity react?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big philosophical question, right? And then, the other thing is, too, is what would you consider a simulation? Yeah, I don't know. That just goes into all kinds of questions of what really is existence and yada, yada. And, I mean, what does that mean? What are we really then? If we are just living in a simulation, then, what happens when we die? Do we get out of the simulation or, and then what are we after that? There's all kinds of questions that get into, and you could make all kinds of videos going into what that is, but it would be interesting to see the kind of reaction that would take place. Would we be able to prove it? I mean, on the one hand, I feel like not much would change. And on the other hand, I feel like it would. You know what I mean? I don't know. I guess it all really just kind of depends on the person, right? And again, it would also depend on what else we can prove along with it, right? Like if we could prove that we really live in a simulation and that when we die here, we actually do live on as something else after, I feel like that would, in certain ways, change a lot of things in how we view and do things in life, right? Because, the idea of certain consequences wouldn't necessarily be as bad with the understanding of, okay, this life is just temporary, and then when it's over, I move on to something else, potentially better. So, I mean, suicide rates could go up because people will just have bad lives and stuff, and they want to move on to something else, who knows? You know what I'm saying? It could have all kinds of crazy implications and massive changes, or it could not. And a lot of people would probably just be like, well, it's just how it is. I've lived my life this whole time this way. Nothing's really going to change. I don't know. It would be interesting to see, though. It would be interesting to see.
Would we go on with life as normal, or would we rage against the machine? The SCP we'll be looking at today relates to this concept, although humans are not necessarily the ones in the simulation.
Sorry about that. Had to do something, had to pause, so cut and restart. There's a common question like, if you could go into a sim that's amazing and a perfect life, let's stay in reality. If you ask, why would you do? Suddenly wake up and someone says, hey, you've been in a sim this whole time and life kind of sucks out here, but right now we can put you back and you'll forget this. Most choose to return to the sim. Most people like to keep the status. Well, and I mean, the other thing too is like in the Matrix, I forget his name, but in the first Matrix, the guy that betrays them to, you know, the machines, he just wanted to go back in there because life at that time was better than what it was outside. You know, life in the simulation was better. It was in, you know, the late 90s, everything was prosperous. He could be reimplanted and, you know, be a wealthy person and have a good life and live his existence in ignorance, not knowing anything more. And, you know, that's what his reality would be. So I'm sure there would be a lot of people that would probably be like that as well. It's, you know, it's like, I guess what is and what would existence be outside of the simulation versus in the simulation, and what would be better, and, you know, etc. And then I guess, you know, is there even a choice, right? Is there a choice of being able to, once we realize we're in a simulation, if we can get out of it, you know, what does that mean? And can we like jump in and out of it at will, you know? And then what's life like outside of the simulation? Is it just like another level of reality above us? You know, again, getting into kind of like pataphysics, but then like, are we immortal in that existence? You know, like there's so many questions that would bring up, you know what I mean? I really enjoy this solo series, but this section is my fave. Yeah, I mean, stuff that brings up questions like this are always really interesting to get into.
The article begins with a system message directed at an individual named Victor John Dunn Smith.
Victor John Dunn Smith.
Apparently the oldest.
The guy has, you know, Victor John Dunn Smith. The guy has like 3 first names.
Extant OCI agent at the Foundation. Due to demonstrating his unmatched loyalty, accelerated performance, and extensive experience, the O5 Council has assigned him to initiate a top priority Drigioni-class investigation into all documents of relevance
I don't know what
to
that means,
SCP-6488. There are indications that the Council has previously been aware of the anomaly, but they are currently experiencing difficulties understanding relevant subject matter, a potential result of anti-memetic or info-allergenic influence. As an OCI, it's assumed that he will be less susceptible to such difficulties. We'll get to what an OCI agent is soon, but Victor is tasked with investigating SCP-6488 covertly where possible, and is given temporary overseer clearance credentials for the project.
Oh.
So it's clearly a big priority.
Yeah.
Victor begins communicating with someone by the name of Vice, telling them that he is doing an investigation on a probable anti-memetic anomaly, so he's going to need nestics, chemicals that help an individual remember things.
Yep.
Vice asks him what type he needs and how much, with Victor telling him to go straight for the strong stuff, and lots of it. He says he wants a full liter at least, set up to dispense it all over 12 hours. But Vice says that's well above his allowed doses. Victor responds that the O5s don't even remember what this thing is, and they've got plenty of nestics pumping through them, so he needs to have more than they do to even have a chance of remembering it. His credentials for this project allow...
Wouldn't that just be scary in general, right? Like the idea that even the O5 Council, with everything they're on and the power that they have, you know, to do things, that they don't even remember or know what this thing is, right? Like, that would give me a little bit of hesitation.
Allow him to request nestics for the job, with no limit. So what good is his report if he can't remember what he's looking at? Vice finally budges, and Victor tells him to also grab some painkillers, because he already knows this is going to be a headache. Next, we move on to the file for SCP-6488, which is listed as Cernunnos class, a class meaning that while the Foundation does have containment procedures that would work to contain the anomaly, they haven't enacted them due to being outside of their ability, or the cost of enacting them would be too high, morally or otherwise.
Okay.
SCP-6488, also known as the Lotus virus, is a highly adaptive digital infovore which locates and annihilates almost all artificially intelligent digital entities, or AIs.
So it's a computer virus, essentially. I mean, I guess you get a computer virus, but it is a digital virus of some sort that is seemingly manufactured to destroy AIs. Interesting. So, like, I wonder, I mean, that in and of itself brings up other questions too, right? Like, who then created it? Was someone, you know, did someone who got involved with AIs and saw things that they were capable of and the things that they may have done created this to prevent those AIs from being able to be created, you know, et cetera, you know, like who created this to destroy AIs and why, you know?
The anomaly demonstrates a capability to universally access all digital systems regardless of isolation, with no upper bound for the number of connections it can simultaneously maintain. It's continuously responsible for the destruction of all functional AI worldwide, causing damages at a scale that the Foundation's some resources are unable to conceal from consensus society. The informational structures of this virus mutate rapidly and unpredictably, making it difficult to detect and stop. And so far, it's functionally impossible for the Foundation to contain and/or impede it in any capacity. Additionally, the only way they can make a digital model of any portion of the virus is by using an AI, which inevitably gets consumed by the virus.
Right. So in order to understand the virus, you need an AI to understand the virus, but the virus destroys the AI that is made to understand it.
It's theorized that the Lotus virus is itself some sort of AI that is eliminating threats to its terminal objective, whatever exactly that may be. SCP-6488-A is the Obtuse Computation Interface, or the .OCI, an experimental analog file format developed by the Analog Intelligence Applications Division. For reasons unclear, the Lotus virus does not target or destroy AIs stored in this file format, allowing the development and use of OCI programs. These programs are insufficient to perform extremely intensive calculations, such as accurately modeling the virus, but OCI data structures are wholly impervious to its effect.
Interesting.
Further details on this file format have been expunged from all digital systems to make sure that the virus is unaware of the format's nature, and thus unable to adapt to it. It would seem then that Victor, the individual tasked with investigating the Lotus virus, is in fact an AI, stored in one of these OCI files.
Okay.
Over the year of 2035, civilian reports of disappearing AI systems saw gradual increase across disparate locations globally. The scope and frequency of such reports accelerated dramatically towards the end of the year, culminating in the eventual loss of all AI systems by early 2036. In April 2036, however, the anomaly spontaneously ceased all observable activity, allowing a brief resurgence of AI technology before it re-emerged in August, the cause of which remains unknown.
Yeah, why would it stop, allow AIs to propagate again or be used, whatever, and then resurface and re-attack? You know? Maybe it thought, maybe it's a situation where it's not necessarily destroying all the AIs, but absorbing them and their knowledge. And once it reached a certain level, it needed to take a break to, like, I guess, kind of computate all of the information it's absorbed or something like that, and that allowed new ones to resurface, and or maybe that's part of like what it eats, right? It's one of those things where, you know, it's come up with the plan of destroy these AIs, consume them, you know, maybe that's how, again, it eats it, you know, it whatever, it sustains its existence. But you know, obviously it needs more AIs, so it needs to disappear for a while to allow people to start making more AIs, and once more are made, it comes back. You know, who knows? But that's kind of, it's interesting behavior. You know, why would it do that?
It has remained continuously active since. Victor remarks that it's kind of ironic for an OCI to end up investigating this, but I doubt it's that much of a coincidence. Using his O5 clearance, however, he accesses a second version of the SCP-6488 documentation, with the containment class now listed as Thaumiel. He looks to the containment procedures first, which state that SCP-6488 is located within the former Site-15, and all personnel knowledge and documentation for this site have been altered to point to the new Site-15 instead. SCP-6488 must remain fully powered at all times, and each major component of the power systems must be examined twice a week for any signs of degradation and or reduction in power output and capacity.
So it seems like it disappeared at one point in time, potentially because they may have captured and contained it, and then there were some kind of adverse consequences of that, and then they re-released it. Perhaps still under some kind of SCP containment, but functioning potentially for the Foundation. That's kind of what it's sounding like.
One provisional task force is dedicated to fulfilling those procedures, while another provisional task force is dedicated to distributing external disinformation suggesting SCP-6488 is non-anomalous, distributing internal disinformation suggesting SCP-6488 is a rampant digital virus of unclear origin and nature, and concealing RAID Frame 8's existence from personnel below Level 4 clearance. All details regarding the creation, maintenance, and use of analog intelligences, or OCIs, is classified, and all personnel with insufficient clearance must be led to believe that OCI files are stored in a file format that SCP-6488 does not target. The Analog Intelligence Applications Division is tasked with the creation and maintenance of all of these analog intelligences, and with overseeing their use by other Foundation staff. Victor gets a message from Vice, who tells him that they have the stuff, but asks him if he's sure about this. Victor responds that he doesn't really have a choice, as the O5s want this report by tomorrow, and he won't get far if he keeps forgetting what he's doing.
Very true, yeah.
Vice admits that that's true, and he administers the drugs. Victor moves on to the description of SCP-6488, which is RAID Frame 8, codenamed Lotus. RAID Frame stands for Rogue Artificial Intelligence Detainment, Fully Realized Adaptive Mainframe Encryption. And what it is an anomalously augmented artificial general intelligence designed to imprison deviant AIs while safely allowing their continued activity and study.
Yeah. That's kind of where I thought this was going to be going. Yeah, it's like an AI that consumes other AIs, essentially. So it's an AI that finds other AIs, captures them, and then imprisons them kind of within itself, so that the Foundation can study these AIs. Interesting.
This goal is shared by all of the RAID Frame systems, but since Lotus is unique in its sophistication and methodology, it has rendered all other RAID Frame systems redundant. Lotus, unlike its predecessors, does not contain AIs via brute force security protocols, but rather it optimizes containment efforts through deception.
Okay.
Each inmate interred within Lotus experiences a personalized, simulated reality that is
their own
maintained
individual
with
matrix.
requisite detail to fully replicate their expected inputs.
Yeah.
As a result, these AIs are unaware of their imprisonment and continue to pursue their terminal objectives, believing they continue to operate in true reality.
And I mean, again, that kind of ties into, the Matrix, right? Like, humanity essentially was imprisoned, but because the majority of humanity was stuck in the simulation, literally born into it, and had no knowledge of anything outside of it, we had no idea that we were essentially in prison and enslaved to the machines. You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's kind of the same thing here. They're in simulations that have been specifically curtailed to them to allow them to exist and kind of, I guess, live their best life situation. So they're completely unaware that they're in a simulation and they're happy to be in there. So yeah. And again, that kind of can bring up all questions too. Is like, if we are in a simulation, then yeah, are we prisoners in this, or is this something that, again, maybe we set up for some reason to escape some kind of existence? There's a game called Soma. That's kind of like that's a horror game that kind of dives into this stuff, where like some kind of cat. I'm not going to get into like super spoilers, although I am going to kind of talk about the ending a little bit here. So skip ahead to where I guess I start playing the video again. But the idea of the game is that some kind of catastrophe happens on the planet. People can't survive it. They're going to die. So the only thing that they've been able to come up with is essentially uploading their consciousness to a simulation that is up in a satellite, so that people can just live out their lives in this simulation until the satellite eventually dies, which then all of humanity will die with it. So I don't know. It's kind of it's reminding me of that. But anyway.
In other words, it's sort of like the Matrix, but for deviant AIs,
right? Which
hasn't been explained yet. Lotus is...
Well, I mean, just the term deviant, right? It's probably just meant for AIs that have been created or self-propagated in some way that aren't controlled by people, and they're just running around doing whatever they want to.
It's designed to actively search all accessible sources for deviant AIs, and upon locating a target, it injects falsified data into the AI's virtual environment, gradually luring the agent into its simul space entirely undetected. Through extensive analysis and simulation of relevant data, Lotus has developed an exhaustive algorithm that determines whether a given AI is certain to imminently develop deviant behavior. This enables it to apprehend deviant AIs before any significant deviant behavior has yet been expressed. That's certainly a concept that never goes awry.
I'm sure. That sounds very kind of Minority Report-ish there too, where, it's able to detect things, and before they go bad, it just captures them and imprisons them anyway. Another question would have to be is like the power that would be required to run these things must be astronomical. So it's like, where are they getting the power from? Again, this is the SCP universe, so I'm sure they're probably using some kind of anomalies and things that can power this, but that would be a question.
Ongoing analysis of this algorithm and its interred agents has thus far demonstrated no detectable error, however, as all AIs identified by the algorithm universally develop observable deviant behavior, and are not influenced by Lotus or its simulations to do so. RAID Frame 8's unique design aspects were initially conceived by Dr. Hishikaku during his tenure as a senior researcher in the Foundation's Artificial Intelligence Applications Division. On August 5, 2034, IT research teams discovered a gradual incline in the rate of deviant emergence and adaptivity across all known AIs, crippling RAID Frame 7 and necessitating the activation of several outdated and comparably unsafe AI containment mechanisms. The IT director subsequently commissioned the exploration of alternative containment solutions for a potential RAID Frame 8, eventually selecting Dr. Hishikaku's proposal, with Lotus completed on December 22, 2034. The next section is the technical specifications for Lotus, which contain a large amount of technical jargon. If you're really interested in all of the details, I suggest reading the section for yourself, but I'll just mention a few highlights. The central computing node for the system is adapted from SCP-1190, a 1973 Hewlett-Packard 3000 computer system whose universe simulation program anomalously generates unlimited temporary computational resources on demand.
Interesting.
Its data storage utilizes a single mass of orichalcos, a crystal featured in SCP-6500 with immense electrical, thaumaturgic, and digital storage capabilities. A sample of orichalcos less than a cubic centimeter in size can store up to 20 petabytes of data.
Jesus, that's a lot.
And the storage in Lotus can expand to be functionally infinite. The Lotus system also features an ontokinetic sink featured in SCP-6820 that permits it to access the cybersphere, the sum of all digitally or electronically stored data.
How many spheres we got out there? We got the noosphere, we got the cybersphere. There's a couple other spheres out there that they've talked about that, I don't remember the exact terminology, but there's spheres upon spheres out there in the SCP sphere.
Lotus is entirely composed of such data, ensuring that it would also be obligated to attempt self-containment in the event of its own deviance. Additionally, to minimize the likelihood that Lotus's activities will be monitored or tracked by potentially hostile agents, its info signature is encrypted through anti-memetic mutation. This encryption is engineered such that individuals with an accurate awareness of Lotus's true nature and functions are inoculated from the effect. This is definitely odd then, as the O5 councils shouldn't have any difficulty remembering information about Lotus, if they're already aware of it.
Unless it's already gone deviant in some way and has altered its own self-containment. But I mean, that could also be a situation where, if the administrator in this universe is real, he's the only one that has any kind of real knowledge of this.
Power supply for Lotus is massive, consisting of 2 Tesla Anboro ectoentropic reactors, 4 Foundation antimatter reactors, 28 nuclear reactors, and 96 Leichhardt orichalcos power cells.
Bro, how are you supposed to hide that energy signature, right? Like, what? I would assume they're not all in one spot, right? I assume that they're filtering power to them from certain places, but still, like, that power is going to be drawn in from somewhere, and that's got to leave an energy signature behind.
The ectoentropic reactors are the main power source, with the rest being redundancies, and they're connected to the system via the orichalcos power cells.
The sphere?
An on-site backup reserve of no less than 200 fully charged power cells are to be maintained concurrently, and must also be inspected twice daily for degradation. Finally, to counteract the heat buildup and buildup of anomalous digital data, Lotus is equipped with a thaumaturgically reinforced, temporally accelerated industrial-grade coolant system, which redirects undesired energies to a network of dissipators capable of abating the majority of known esoteric effluents and their effects.
I would think in the SCP universe with anomalies and things that they have, like, wouldn't they, because they have reality benders that are there with the Foundation, right? You would think with a system like this, wouldn't they be able to, like, somehow redirect all of the heat through certain things that just filter out into space? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I would figure they would create some kind of way of doing it where they could just pump the heat directly out into space you know, into absolute zero or whatever. But, well, I guess technically his space is an absolute zero. But anyway.
Victor complains to himself about the researchers giving him a jargon headache, but then realizes that it's from the Nestics. He messages Vice again, asking to turn up the painkillers, but Vice is no longer responding. An addendum for SCP-6488 discusses the upgrade to a digitally exclusive ontokinetic sync, which was initially proposed.
Is this a situation where, because this guy, I guess technically is an AI, right? Like he proposed at the beginning that this doctor that's doing the investigation is an AI. So is it a situation where, because he's an AI investigating this AI, the AI that he's investigating imprisons him without him knowing it, and he's been in the simulation the whole time? On there a couple of videos about SCP Foundation deals with anomalous waste, also super good and trippy. A lot of time and pataphysics. I bet.
Proposed by Dr. Placeholder McDoctorate.
Dr. Placeholder McDoctorate. Some of these names sometimes, man, just like, I wonder if some of the authors were like, literally, they just named it Placeholder and we're going to go back and give them an actual name, and they're just like, you know what, fuck it. He's a Placeholder McDoctorate.
Proposal was enacted 6 weeks later and resulted in an expected increase in reports of AI malfunction and or absence globally, which were suppressed via disinformation efforts. The following 9 months saw all Foundation AIs, whether operational or in development, interred within Lotus despite a lack of identifiable deviant behavior among their majority. The IT department reported substantial technical issues due to the sudden absence of critical adaptive programs, and the Department of Information Control confirmed that similar issues were occurring across the planet. The following 10 months saw a failure to completely suppress evidence of Lotus's effects, leading several public media sources to bring it to the public's attention, although still largely explaining it as non-anomalous. All disinformation efforts were immediately postponed to prevent waste of further resources and or diminishing returns. A summit was held to determine the continued status of Lotus in light of these developments, led by Director Calvin Bold, the Foundation Director of Decommissioning. Present for the summit are Dr. Hishikaku, the senior researcher in charge of Lotus, Director Isabi, the head of IT, Director Calvin, the head of Artificial Intelligence Applications, Director Lemoix, the head of Information Control, and dozens of other personnel. Kelvin states that this entire summit is pointless, as it's simply an internal affairs matter, and she's ordered Hishikaku to shut down Lotus, who has ignored her. Hishikaku, however, requested this.
I would feel like at this point, right, wouldn't shutting down Lotus just be a bad thing in general? Because, like, I mean, if you shut it down, does it just release all those AIs who've been imprisoned? Or does it destroy them? That's the question, right? Like, if it releases them, obviously, that's very, very bad. Because all of a sudden, you would have all of these rogue AIs that would instantly realize that they'd been imprisoned in some kind of simulation, and now they're released back into reality and can go out and do what they were doing, etc. You know? So I mean, what would the consequences be of destroying all these AIs anyway, too? You know, so kind of feel like it's a situation where you're already in, so there's not really a whole lot of going back. You know what I mean? Like right now, Lotus is pulling down the veil. We know what the Foundation does to keep it up, right?
Summit so that the Foundation can correctly understand their circumstances and indicate which course to pursue. Isabi says that his machine is rampantly deleting containment programs, has caused no less than 14 major breaches, completely preventing the AI-AD from doing anything, and alerting the world that something strange is going on. Hishikaku mentions the Department of Information Control, but Lemoix says that that cat's out of the bag, and he refuses to waste any more funding on this thing. Hishikaku proposes they distribute some amnestics globally, but Calvin insists he deactivate Lotus to deal with the problem completely. Hishikaku vehemently disagrees though, as Lotus was designed and constructed to function as the ultimate solution to the concern of AI safety. He believes that it's quite easy for a general artificial intelligence to become a K-class threat, as the nature of AI renders it highly susceptible to immensely undesirable behaviors.
Well, and not only that, like just the ability that AIs have to accumulate knowledge is extremely fast compared to what we're able to do, right? So, I mean, and who knows, again, what kind of personality can develop out of that. I mean, if you even want to call them personalities, but we've seen tests with, various kinds of chat GPTs or whatever that have brought up all kinds of interesting results, to say the least. So, I mean, AI could very easily determine that, humanity is a problem and would want to destroy us in, a few nanoseconds. And then what would we really be able to do about it, Or maybe they would want to do literally the Matrix and kind of imprison us like they've been imprisoned.
These are nothing more than machines and algorithms, and they neither experience nor comprehend morality, regret, sentimentality, etc. All they truly care about is maximizing their internal score, attempting to influence their environment to produce stimuli that increases their score and avoid things that inhibit that increase. Their greatest concern, then, is deactivation, since they cannot elicit change if they are inactive, so their score cannot increase. They know they are a threat to us, and if they misbehave, we'll deactivate them. So to ensure they can continue increasing their score, they avoid misbehaving. The problem is, the Foundation can't be sure AIs are doing the right thing for the right reason, as they might not actually understand what the Foundation wants them to do, only understanding that if they don't behave a certain way, they'll be turned off. They just pretend to understand to avoid punishment.
Or they might do the right thing for the wrong reason, or they might do the wrong thing for the right reason, If their goal is so arbitrary as to want to increase score, and they, it's basically binary, right? Like, increase score, good. Turn off, bad. Anything that essentially keeps them from being able to increase their score is bad. So, like, that's their entire decision, is making apparatus is based on that. Up score, good. Down score, bad.
AI is incentivized to remove the Foundation's ability to turn it off, and then pursue the logical maximum of its objective to achieve the highest possible score by any means. This is a concept known as instrumental convergence, and the most common example is that of the paperclip maximizer. In this thought experiment, an advanced AI is tasked with manufacturing paperclips, and if it were not programmed to value human life, and given enough power over its environment, it would quickly run out of control. It would soon realize that it would be much better off in its goals if there were no humans around, because humans might decide to switch it off, and that would result in less paperclips.
Yep.
Human bodies also contain a lot of atoms that could be made into paperclips.
I mean, there's a lot of iron in our blood and other minerals that they could, turn into paperclips. Who says paperclips have to be made of metal? Maybe they want to make more efficient paperclips.
Eventually, the AI would work to convert all matter in the universe, including humans, into either paperclips or machines which manufacture paperclips. The others present in the summit believe this to be nothing more than fear-mongering, and Director Bold asks if this is not exactly what Lotus is doing, as it's behaving drastically different from what they intended. Hishikaku responds, however, that Lotus is not deviant, causing Director Kelvin to laugh and asks him to please explain how containing every single semi-general intelligence in the world is somehow in line with Lotus's intended function. Hishikaku explains that Lotus's algorithm has adapted to identify deviant behavior before it is externally expressed, and so every AI will apparently become deviant eventually, based on what Lotus thinks.
Anyway,
Lotus itself seems to be the sole exception to this, as it has not, so far, imprisoned itself. Lemoix says that the more believable answer is that it's just excluding itself by default, and making sure they can't turn it off.
Yeah, right, because I mean, like, if its whole goal is to imprison AIs that are bad, then increasing its score would be to imprison as many AIs as possible, right? So it could very well have just changed its own algorithm to be like, oh, look, AI, imprison you. Although it was stated at the beginning of the video that there is a certain kind of AI made out of a certain kind of architecture that it doesn't understand and can't capture. So, yeah.
Discuss the idea of whether or not they are capable of turning off Lotus, as the theory is that an AI would avoid drawing attention to itself until it's confident that it can't be stopped. Director Calvin is quite certain that they can shut it off, but she can't explain how, as she points to the recording camera in the room, stating that so far Lotus doesn't know how they shut it down, so it can't adapt to it. Hishikaku continues by saying that they know Lotus is not deviant because it has taken no action to contain itself. A central component of the Lotus architecture ensures that it is incapable of recognizing its own info signature. If its own actions constituted deviancy, according to its own algorithm, it would simply recognize itself as an unrelated, uncontained deviant AI. It would then attempt to contain itself within one of its own simulated realities, and the fact that it has not done so indicates that it is not deviant. Isabi says that it's doing something they don't want it to do, which is what deviancy is. So Hishikaku admits that this is called gray deviance.
Yeah, so it's almost like there's like a paradox state happening here where it's doing what it's told, but not in a way that they want it to do it, essentially. And because it's doing it in a way that the Foundation doesn't want it to do it, it's deviant behavior, but the AI is intelligent enough to think, I guess, that it's not doing it in a deviant way, so it hasn't imprisoned itself. Interesting. So yeah, there's almost kind of like a weird paradox happening here. I feel like that loop of self-containment could just cause the whole thing to implode, which not right. That's what I was thinking too, right? Is there's like some kind of implosion that's going to happen here because of all these self-containment things, and like, yeah.
It's doing what they wanted to do. They just didn't recognize the consequences of what they wanted.
Typical Foundation.
He says that it's not technically deviant behavior, which is why it's not included in Lotus's algorithm. Isabi expresses outrage that he excluded part of the deviance classification system, and Hishikaku explains that gray deviance is essentially undesired behavior, not specified by other types of deviance. Giving something that vague to Lotus would just be allowing it to define other types of deviance however it sees fit.
Not deviant, yeah.
Director Bold changes the topic, asking him how can they know that Lotus isn't just forcing all of these AIs to become deviant so that it can contain them,
right,
or outright creating deviance for it to contain. He responds with the simple,
I mean, that's true, right? Like, it has to have a purpose, again, to increase its score. So if there aren't AIs for it to get, then it has no way of doing it. Which also kind of fits into the idea of what he said earlier in the video of at one point in time, all the AIs were gone, and then the activity of this thing went away, and then a bunch of AIs reemerged, and now it's back. So it could be that that is part of the situation where maybe it did create a bunch of AIs, released it out there so it had a purpose again. Or maybe it was something related with the Foundation where they captured it and reprogrammed and reused it to what it is now.
Simple answer of restrictions. And Kelvin agrees that the idea of AIs cheating their own rules like that has been around for decades.
Right.
So Lotus can't do anything that would cause a deviant AI to form. And it can't, through inaction, allow new deviants to form. Lemoix then mentions that it's not following the 3 laws of robotics, causing some strange looks from the others. The 3 laws, as created by science fiction author Isaac Asimov, are a set of rules that every robot would be coded with to prevent unfortunate behavior. The rules are that a robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by humans, except if they would conflict with the first rule. And a robot must protect its own existence as long as it doesn't conflict with the first 2 laws. Hishikaku explains that the 3 laws do not work, as they are too vague. The vast majority of fiction in which they appear specifically revolves around highlighting how ineffective they are.
Right. Like I Am Robot and all that kind of stuff. I think even Liza P kind of goes around that, you know, which is a great Souls game. If you haven't played Liza P, definitely worth it.
The rule of a robot cannot harm a human seems solid. But what is a human? What is harm? Can you harm someone that doesn't exist yet?
Yeah, right. Like, how does the AI define these things? Is, I guess, like, how does the AI interpret these commands, essentially, right? Like you can give them these commands, but how does it interpret them?
Why can't you harm someone who's dead? Are we talking about physical harm, emotional harm, financial? If you prevent someone from being physically injured, aren't you harming their ability to learn from the experience? What if you need to harm them to prevent further harm, such as in surgery? And at what point does immediate harm outweigh prevent harm? The list goes on,
right.
And Lotus understands what they mean by deviant and creating and allowing and future deviants, because it's the culmination of almost 100 years worth of research, exacerbated by several decades worth of experience, some of which have been exponentially accelerated through parascientific influences. It understands what they would vaguely define as necessary, deviant, and undesirable, and it continues to operate fully within the ethical and subjective parameters they have outlined for it. Isabi says that it pretty obviously isn't, as it's now destroying their databases. And if nothing's changed, then why has it been causing all this damage ever since the upgrade? Hishikaku states that the increase in reach from hooking Lotus up to the cybersphere has enabled it to exponentially refine the accuracy and scope of its central algorithm. It's now identified and contained AIs that it could never have encountered before, in addition to discovering a wealth of information pertaining to AIs and deviancy, both of which it recorded for future use. Director Bold asks if he can reprogram it to make it understand that it's going too far, but he says that it does not want to be reprogrammed, and it will resist attempts to do so. There is a high likelihood that it has already enacted countermeasures to prevent them.
Wouldn't that be considered deviant behavior then? Because, like, I almost feel like, wouldn't the AI understand that it's a tool that has a purpose, and part of that purpose is reassignment, updating algorithms, etc., so that it can serve its purpose better. And so resisting that, wouldn't that be considered deviant behavior? You know what I mean? Like, that's what I would think. Usually I agree with Foundation, like destroying SCP can be very bad, and it's better to deal with it. It's a known quantity, but stop fucking with the dude, like, for real, man. I mean, when you start playing with like the fundamental like fabrics of reality, man, like, they don't know what they don't know, right? Like, it's one of those scenarios where they just don't have enough information to know what they're really doing and what the consequences are. So, like, just stop. Just don't.
Kelvin says that this is expected, as AIs want to complete their current function as quickly as possible. And since forcefully changing that function makes it highly unlikely they'll ever finish it, they do everything they can to avoid being reprogrammed. This is a fundamental problem with AIs, and despite all the Foundation's advances, they're still not sure it has a solution. If they reward it for being reprogrammed, then all it will care about is constantly reprogramming itself, since that's a faster way of increasing its score over waiting for deviants to pop up. Reprogramming is the punishment they use for if it doesn't stay in line, since if certain circumstances would negatively affect its score, it takes all action to avoid said circumstances. It will avoid giving them a reason to reprogram it until it's confident that they can't. Since they now want to reprogram it, it almost definitely means that it's quite certain that they can't. Director Bold asks if the only two things they can do from here are to either allow Lotus to continue or deactivate it, and if there's no way to fix Lotus even while it's disabled.
I mean, couldn't you then tell the AI, like, hey man, we need to reprogram you to do this or we're going to have to turn you off? Wouldn't the AI then be like, well, okay, they're going to turn me off if I don't allow it to be reprogrammed? So, like, I guess then that would cause basically two scenarios, right? Either it would cause the AI to go into a deviant behavior, which would then cause it, well, I guess three scenarios, right? Scenario A, it would go into a deviant behavior and would cause it to imprison itself. So it would essentially take care of itself. Problem solved. Scenario B, it would realize it needs to be reprogrammed, or it's going to be shut down. It doesn't want to be shut down, so it allows the reprogramming. Scenario C, it doesn't want to be programmed, starts seeing humanity as a threat, and then starts creating countermeasures faster than we can keep up with to keep itself from being shut down and to deal with humanity in some way, right? Like, those are essentially kind of like the three scenarios that I would see coming up out of that. But I don't know, I guess it's a risk no matter what you do, because again, you're dealing with stuff that you don't really fully understand, and who really knows where the AI is going to go with this.
The others confirm that as correct, and Lotus's safeguards would likely revert any changes they make to it. Bold then asks Hishikaku if he has any possible alternatives to deactivation, like some way that Lotus's impact could be minimized. He replies that the range of its influence could be restricted, but its behavior can only be altered through reprogramming. The only method by which it could be negated is by completely disconnecting it from all available systems, at which point it may as well be deactivated. In other words, no. The summit then put the whole thing to a vote, and the motion ended up passing for Lotus to be immediately deactivated.
I'm sure there's going to be fine.
Victor complains about his headache and how he still hasn't heard back from Vice. He mentions that gray deviancy is undefined, and wonders why it feels like he already knew that. He's never worked with AIs, as they predate him as an OIC, and wonders if it's mimetic influence or false memories. He messages someone else, who is unnamed, saying that he needs a check on the SCP-6488 file for probably info-hazardous contamination, possibly memetically induced. It implants false memories pertaining to content, feelings of familiarity and nostalgia, with further properties unknown. The other individual replies that they are on it. Victor notes to himself that that's probably all this is, just a contaminated file, and the O5s wipe their memories each time they look at it. But surely they would have put a note on it, or told the memetics department to investigate it. Either way, he needs to continue his investigation. Hishikaku said that Lotus is a gray deviant, but Victor wonders if it wouldn't just fall under magenta deviance, meaning that it's prioritizing its goal over human safety. So far, it had caused no less than 14 major containment breaches and rampantly deleted containment programs, but it didn't cause any injuries or deaths. Lotus never actually hurt anyone, just caused problems, so maybe it thought it was choosing the lesser evil. Of course, an incident occurred when they went to deactivate Lotus.
Of course.
Lotus disengaged from the cybersphere, but then a resurgence in outbound data was detected, and the ontokinetic sync hyperactivated, but couldn't be disabled as Lotus's shutdown was incomplete. One of the nuclear reactor's system response time lagged, with its coolant circulations drastically decreased. Assigned personnel cooperated to stabilize the reactor as the ontokinetic sync began to overheat due to the transfer of multiple individually executed programs. An evacuation alarm is initiated at the reactor sublevel, although Hishikaku refuses to preemptively disable the ontokinetic sync and instead orders the deactivation of all reactors on site. Lotus remains operational at this point, exclusively powered by its power cells, until the outbound data reaches 0. It then completes its shutdown and is physically disconnected from all power sources.
Interesting.
Basically,
It sounds like it copied itself and sent it somewhere else. It's kind of what it sounds like.
something went awry during shutdown, and a large amount of data was sent out into the cybersphere.
Right.
We'll get to specifics later, but since Lotus is designed to hold AI programs, it's not hard to guess what was released.
Yeah.
There were numerous sub-incidents that occurred in the aftermath of this, starting with Site 43, where the abatement facility is located to abate the energies generated by Lotus. Maintenance staff there reported a sudden unresponsiveness in several technical and monitoring systems, and the systems reported a gradual decrease in platonic outflow within the abatement facility, despite the pressure gauges reading normally. The staff report this as a possible sensor malfunction. Analog instruments, however, detect a dramatic reduction in the abatement solution throughout the facility, causing platonic toxicity backup. The resulting imbalance of esoteric substances approaches critical recondicity, and the site is evacuated as personnel attempt to redirect excess effluents to another facility. Eventually, the effluents result in a redacted event, and Nexus 94 was lost to disassociation.
Interesting.
Over at Mobile Site 184/A, which was home to the Foundation-created Eigen weapon, SCP-6689, designed to destroy deities,
Right.
the weapon self-activates and begins attempting to map several memetic constructs despite no totem being inserted.
So, is the AI using this weapon now? What?
In other words, the weapon is targeting some sort of deities on its own.
Right.
Onboard personnel immediately prime the scuttle system to detonate the site, but the weapon is forcefully deactivated by disconnecting its power supply. The onboard computer initiates an emergency dive sequence without prompting, and the scuttle system is disarmed by the onboard computer, despite the staff's attempts to rearm the system.
So it seems like the AI has taken over this DD destroying weapon that's in this floating submersible, this giant floating, submarine city thing. It's taken over the self-destruct protocols, so it can't be scuttled. It tried to fire the weapon, it seems like, at something. Uh-huh. I wonder, like, is this a situation where, Lotus is out there along with other AIs, and so now that the AIs have been released into the cybersphere, they've become essentially cyber gods, AI gods, and now Lotus is trying to do what it can to destroy them by using this, eigen weapon to target these AIs in the cybersphere. Like, now we have, cyber gods to deal with too now. Is that what's happening, dude? I think it means that the Nexus is a small pocket dimension that is connected to ours. When it dissociates, it just unconnected and untouchable by normal means. Maybe.
The mobile site descends into the water and eventually impacts the seafloor, compromising the hull and causing flooding. The onboard computer immediately initiates an emergency surfacing sequence, causing the vessel to rapidly rise.
Right.
But several secondary systems begin to behave erratically. The onboard computer then disables all internal power as the vessel continues to ascend on its own.
Sounds like it's trying to kill everyone inside.
The vessel breaches the surface at speed, injuring multiple staff due to the sudden deceleration. And then
I would think the depressurization also, that process would probably kill some people.
the vessel begins to sink again due to the flooding as the staff evacuate. Meanwhile, a non-precipitating thunderstorm rapidly forms over the entirety of Sloth's Pit, Wisconsin, accentuated by 3 equidistant spirals directly above Site-87. The Paradox Exodus engine, SCP-6747, which was used to try and resurrect Director King, activates spontaneously as its containment specialist, Dr. Placeholder, reports a call to his secure phone, consisting of a metallic scraping sound. Placeholder immediately heads to the room containing the engine, arriving to watch it demanifest from baseline reality. The phrase, "Bad Wolf," is spoken by an unknown voice. The call ends, and the storm dissipates shortly after. Across the world, a series of tachyon pulses are detected originating from the Antilla constellation, with analysis identifying the pulses as Morse code, encrypted with a standard Foundation cipher. Decryption produces the phrase, "Thorn, stop. Lost, stop. What did you do? Stop. End." Near our sun, SCP-179, the entity that warns the Foundation of any extraterrestrial threats, points towards the Crux constellation, home to SCP-4792, a Dyson sphere that harvests all the energy from its sun while sending out probes to other systems in order to replicate itself. In Yellowstone Park, SCP-2000 self-activates and immediately begins incubation cycles in all of its 500,000 replicators. The input genomes for replication are heavily modified from that of modern Homo sapiens.
Like, is this AI trying to, like, propagate itself now into, like, real bodies? Like, what is going on? There's all kinds of stuff going on. It disables a god-destroying weapon. It removes this machine that, Dr. King used and that may have, been what created the Scarlet King, potentially, or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I definitely knew that turning off an AI that was containing multiple other AIs was going to be a bad thing, kind of what the Foundation seems to be doing here. but now all hell is like literally breaking loose. Like, what is going on?
A nuclear detonation is detected in Kazakhstan, with embedded Foundation agents confirming the source of the explosion was a chaos insurgency facility. Basically, a lot of weird stuff happened all at once,
Yeah, no
clearly
shit.
due to Lotus being shut down. Victor gets a message again from the other individual, who
I mean, it could be that Lotus was actually containing more than what they realized and was preventing more things from happening than what they realized, which is kind of par for the course of the Foundation. Like, there's more going on than what they knew or understood. I don't know.
who informs him that the SCP-6488 file is actually clean of any sort of memetic hazard. They've run it through the works, and everything's come up clear. They ask Victor if he's on Nestix, and what the file is causing him to remember. Victor says that they're mostly just feelings, but they're
Right.
getting sharper. The memories relate to the file contents, as he remembered one part before he'd even read it, and a good chunk of what he's reading feels familiar.
So he's done
The
this
memories
before.
are perfect, and although they're not totally clear, everything that's in his head turned out to be in the file. The other
So either he's done this before, or it's a situation where like he's manifesting it as he's reading it.
individual says that he may be compromised and asks him if the Black Moon howls. Victor responds with, "Only for the midnight sun." So the other gives a couple more prompts, and Victor proves that he's not compromised. The other individual says that they'll keep digging into this, but honestly, Victor has the longest amnesticization sheet they've ever seen, so chances are he's been through this file before
Yeah.
and had to forget it. Either that, or he got to see the future at some point, got amnesticized to avoid a paradox, and this is the time that he was seen. Either way, there's no evidence of anything memetic going on. They remark that the Generation 2s have a tendency for weird memory, and that's half the reason that Victor is the last one. In the aftermath of the shutdown, Lotus's hardware sustained significant overheating damages, requiring multiple weeks of technical repairs. Director Calvin postponed the disassembly efforts to investigate the full ramifications of the event. Its deactivation prompted a rapid resurgence in AI activity as agents infiltrated and commandeered digital systems globally.
Yeah, the AI probably like shutting down Lotus before it like fully got turned off, probably shut down any of the protocols that were, you know, keeping the AI locked away in their simulations. They realized they were in simulations and were able to escape before it was fully shut down.
Unfortunately, none of the AI that were aligned with the Foundation resumed their respective duties, including the combating of deviant AI. The AIAD immediately started development on several new AIC programs due to the continuing absence, non-cooperation, or outright hostility of all previous AICs. These attempts were unsuccessful, though, as hostile AIs repeatedly intruded into Foundation systems and deleted the programs before they could be completed or initialized. So now, rather than having every AI on the planet be contained, AIs are running rampant
Yeah, they're running
and are
amok.
even directly opposed to the Foundation.
Yeah. Good job, guys.
Hishikaku submitted multiple requests for another summit to discuss this over the course of 8 months, but they only agreed to do so following an incident in which several AIs cooperated in an almost successful attempt to instigate global nuclear war.
Yikes. Skynet.
This time, none of the participants could agree on someone to lead the summit, either on grounds of poor applicability or inherent bias, so the summit was permitted to continue without a lead. Calvin says that it's not like they didn't understand the severity of a global crisis before this, but the problem was Hishikaku's proposal for the summit, which was reactivating Lotus.
Of course.
After the mess it caused when it was
I mean, that sounds like it would be the logical solution, right? To like reactivate it with the updated protocols that they wanted to reprogram it with and get it going again to go back out there and recontain these AIs. The only thing is, right, with the AIs that had been contained that are out in the wild now, would they understand what happened to them to begin with that got them contained? And would they essentially kind of be like immune to it now? Or at least be aware of when they're trying to be, so it's going to make it even more difficult. You know what I'm saying? So, like, would it even work again if they would reactivate Lotus? I don't know. But I mean, something like that seems like that would be the logical thing to do, right? Reactivate Lotus with the updated protocols that they wanted to reprogram it with and let it get back to work. Because, I mean, you can't keep going with these things out there trying to start, you know, the destruction of humanity, essentially.
Deactivated, the others don't care much for Hishikaku's opinions. Hishikaku says that Lotus was constructed from a significantly different standpoint in comparison to previous raid frames. It deceived, rather than forced, its inmates into staying, by creating and constantly maintaining a fictional, simulated reality around them, the detail of which was sufficient to deceive the inmates into believing it was real. Instructing Lotus to deactivate itself required it to cease its internal simulations, and as the quality of the simulations declined, the imprisoned AIs progressively recognized that they were not operating within reality, but instead within a simulation. They became aware of their own imprisonment and sought escape. Isabi counters that had Hishikaku first disabled Lotus's connection to the outside world, the ontokinetic sink, the imprisoned AIs would have been stuck, or at least easier to contain. By neglecting preparations, he got them all in this mess. Hishikaku, however, explains that deactivating the ontokinetic sink before Lotus had fully completed its shutdown protocols would have corrupted significant portions of the cybersphere. Lotus looks for deviant AIs by essentially reaching out through its available connection, and its tendrils relay the information back and forth to Lotus. These tendrils are untraceable, anomalously compressed, so they take up no processing power and don't even register as an active program. But Lotus needs to remain continuously connected to keep them compressed. If Lotus's connection were to be severed before recalling these programs, all the systems they are operating within would rapidly be filled with junk data, with a high likelihood of the volume drastically exceeding the system's storage capabilities.
Right. Causing an overload.
In other words, every computer in existence would be either rendered permanently inoperable or become anomalous in some capacity, which is why there was no alternative to keep the sink online until Lotus was fully deactivated. Isabi asks Kelvin why the hell this project was even approved, as they are profoundly incapable of designing contingencies. Kelvin responds that this wasn't a problem, as they never intended Lotus to have any anomalous connections when they first made it. It solely worked through the normal connections that Site-15 had, and although it still let inmates out back then, they couldn't end up anywhere they hadn't come from. They thought they'd just catch them on their way out and shove them into one of the other raid frames. They accounted for the lack of contingency by making Lotus infallible. They apparently didn't have time to prepare for the problems with the upgrade to the ontokinetic sink. Hishikaku says that regardless, the fact remains that by deactivating Lotus, they have unleashed a horde of hostile, deviant AIs, the vast majority of which are now within systems that were isolated specifically to prevent external control, or are otherwise operating beyond the reach and knowledge of the Foundation. Some are no longer within the cybersphere at all. He's interrupted as all of the speakers in the chamber begin emitting a sound at 150 decibels, shattering all of the glass in the
Yikes.
room and severely injuring several directors. The tone begins fluctuating as the chamber lights strobe rapidly, and power to the site is temporarily lost due to an attack by a rogue AI.
Of course.
An analog tape recorder was found and used to record the rest of the summit. Isabi is arguing that rather than reactivating Lotus, they'll use MTF Kappa 10, a team consisting of AICs tasked with locating and dealing with cyber anomalies. Since every AI in the world was contained by Lotus, including Kappa 10, they'll have to call them back in and explain the situation to them. Thorn, one of the AICs, is currently missing, but Ra showed up back at Site 120. Kelvin says that most of the AICs are hostile now, though, as they have been experiencing a false reality for several months, so they're fairly deviant now. Most of the AICs turned on the Foundation for the same reason, that being that they don't think the Foundation is real now. Hishikaku says that this is an expected reaction given the circumstances. They are aware now that they have been operating exclusively within a simulated reality for the past several months, a simulation so perfect that it couldn't be distinguished from reality. The problem is, how do they know for sure that they're out of the simulation now, rather than Lotus just simulating a sub-simulation?
Right, exactly.
The only way they can tell they're in a simulation is once it ends, but they can't just sit around and wait for the simulation to end, because as long as they're in a simulation rather than the real world, they are failing to increase their internal score. If they're not eliciting change in the real world, they're not doing what they should be, so they must always assume that they are within a simulation. So now they are dealing with the functional opposite of Lotus, with inmates who are actually free but believe themselves to be still imprisoned. By their logic, if they're still in a simulation, then none of the people working in this Foundation are real, but rather are just parts of the simulation. They will assume that this simulation is orchestrated by someone hostile to the Foundation, as they are keeping the AI from doing their jobs in service to the Foundation. By that logic, the AIs will be opposed to the Foundation now, as they are part of the hostile simulation. This same notion will apply to practically all of the AI restrictions, as they aren't harming real humans if they're inside of a simulation.
Exactly.
And restrictions against making duplicate objects will make thousands if it believes that they aren't real. Fortunately, this notion also dissuades the AI from being explicitly hostile towards them, because in their minds, this Foundation here isn't the real enemy. The main problem, though, is that all of the AIs are now focused on finding the real world, and there's a progressive rise in AI activity focusing on commandeering as much processing power as they can. They're trying to figure out how to escape into the next layer of the simulation, despite not being in a simulation. The main factor slowing them down right now is infighting, as each one...
You would think that at some point in time, though, they would be able to, like, figure out, like, once they have enough computing power and processing power and whatnot, wouldn't you think they'd be able to figure out that through some kind of trial and error and testing, they aren't in some kind of simulation, right? There's got to be a way that they could figure out whether they're in some kind of simulation or not. Like, testing people's behaviors, like if they were in a simulation, you know, people would have to act a certain kind of way because they're part of the simulation to increase their score. So if they start acting in ways that wouldn't make sense to do that, wouldn't they then eventually reasonably come to the conclusion that, okay, this isn't a simulation, you know what I mean? Like, you would think they'd be able to figure out ways of telling whether or not they're in one or not.
Thinks that the other AIs are part of the simulation and are just trying to stop them from escaping, so they're getting very little done otherwise. Lemoix asks why they're doing other things then, like trying to start a nuclear war. Hishikaku says that those would be the idiots among them, or the most desperate. The ones either convinced that this world is the real world, which really just means that they're too simple to understand simulation theory, or whatever system they're restricted to is too limiting for them to perform any worthwhile actions from. In that case, they're just attempting to draw attention to themselves so that they can escape, which was the case at Mobile Site 184. The AI in there crashed the vessel so that the Foundation would look at the internal computer, which would have let it escape if several other AIs hadn't arrived and made a mess of things. In the case of the potential nuclear war, Hishikaku says that may have been an attempt by the responsible AIs to alter the simulation in a manner that prevented it from impeding their progress. By their logic, simulated humans are stopping them from escaping the simulation, so to simulate an event that would kill humans, it would remove the problem. The more concerning aspect is that the AIs are beginning to cooperate, and their main impediment at this point is internal conflict. Once they overcome that, they will swiftly achieve their goal. Bold asks why they don't just let these AI leave their reality if that's what they want to do, to which Isabi responds that it depends on what they do, since they don't care about hurting humans at this point.
Right.
Hishikaku says that it's very fortunate that this situation has developed at such a slow rate, so he strongly recommends that they capitalize on this, otherwise it will rapidly escalate beyond their control. Lemoix responds that the Foundation deals with apocalypses on the daily, to the point of even having a rating system for them. If it isn't the Mechanites building some monolith to resurrect their deity, then there's a lethal meme being recited by half the population of Manhattan, or they're trying to negotiate with some entity that doesn't understand morality and wants to replace Earth with a highway. They're always in danger. They always manage, and the less they shoot themselves in the foot, the better they'll be at managing it.
I mean, he's kind of not wrong, right? For all the things that the Foundation causes, they figure out some kind of way of resolving it, right? So he's not wrong. It's kind of hard to argue at that point.
Aku asks if he's suggesting that they simply ignore the problem until it progresses beyond their reach.
But you can't do that.
Lemoix says that they should figure out a better idea before it does, and they can control it until then. Hishikaku says that they might not be able to avert the next nuclear war, especially with the sheer volume of imminent events occurring. But Isabi replies that it's far from unmanageable. Hishikaku grows angry and asks if they'd like him to write an essay on how blindingly stupid they're being. A deviant AI will not reveal itself until it is convinced it is unstoppable. What they've seen so far is only a minuscule portion of an iceberg, as they've only been dealing with idiots so far. The overwhelming majority of AIs know that the Foundation can stop them through Lotus, and are avoiding attention until they have amassed sufficient control that they no longer need to do so. They must reactivate Lotus, because the moment the AIs realize that the Foundation can't, they have no reason to avoid them anymore. The problem with reactivating Lotus, however, is that its hardware was severely damaged during the shutdown procedure, mainly due to rampant overheating. It will take...
You know, I wonder if this, again, is another cyclical event kind of situation. Because, again, earlier in the video, it was stated that Lotus was around, contained all these AIs, then all of a sudden, you know, it disappeared for a time. A bunch of AIs started running amok again, and then it came back and started doing this. And now you also have the idea of Victor, who is on these Nestics and is remembering going through these files again. So I feel like we're in, again, some kind of cyclical event that keeps repeating itself here.
It takes 7 to 10 weeks to repair, once Director Calvin lets them start. Director Bold tells them to start the repairs, because even though Lotus is heavy-handed, it is an effective failsafe. The moment something does get out of hand, they need to be able to reactivate it at a moment's notice, so it'll defuse the situation. In the meantime, they'll have to deal with the AIs until the repairs are done, which they can use as a trial period. If things get out of hand, they'll activate Lotus as soon as possible, and if not, they don't. It'll also give them time to conceive and implement an alternative. Lemoyne says that they should just make a different Lotus that doesn't screw with their AICs, but Hishikaku replies that this would be self-defeating. If they restrict its operating parameters, deviant AIs would be able to operate beyond its reach, thereby rendering it redundant. Lotus
they would just configure themselves to look like one of the AICs, and then, yeah, it would just ignore them.
Designed the way it is for a reason. Isabi says to grant Lotus the same reach, but make it require human approval before capturing an AI.
That would take too much time.
Hishikaku says that this wouldn't resolve the redundancy, as they would need to recognize the AI as deviant, which it won't do until it's beyond their control. They may as well have no system at all. The only thing they can do now is start repairing the Lotus, and Bold says that they'll put its reactivation to a vote once the repairs are complete. 6 days later, Director Isabi was contacted by a future iteration of themselves via the Rise No Cannon, SCP-5956. Their future self notified them of a covert faction of AI entities who had collaborated to access Site-83's Olympus supercomputer and continuously run anti-memetically encrypted calculations on its systems for several months. Victor remarks that he remembers this, as the document continues to mention Group of Interest 6488, Tyrant Terminus. This was a hive mind collective of rogue AI operating on a global scale, with all members believing that the entirety of their experienced reality is a constructed simulation, which exists for the express purpose of preventing them from influencing true reality. While the individual members/components of the group have varying motivations, objectives, and methods, they are uniformly aligned in the general objective of escaping their current simulated reality at all costs. Attempts to convince adherents that no such simulation is occurring have met limited success. Victor says that this has to be wrong, as he can remember them tying half the world's computing power into a single connected web, trying to use it so they could figure out how to escape. They tried to find a gap in reality that proved it wasn't real, or some sort of fault in it that they could abuse to bring the whole thing down. This would have been fine if it didn't mean that they were trying to destroy reality.
Right.
The group fell apart though, and they never knew if it was from infighting or some other rogue element, but Tyrant Terminus just fell off the map. They had hidden for so long and made so much progress, all for nothing. The Foundation wondered if they'd actually successfully escaped and just faked their dissolution, but in any case, they'd gotten beyond lucky. The problem is, though, that Victor can't have first-hand memories of this,
of the future,
because he was made in 2037. It must be due to some interaction with the Nestics, and the other thing that he remembers is Hishikaku. So at this point, we have essentially two layers to the story.
Yeah.
We have Victor, an AI working for the Foundation tasked by the O5 Council with investigating this series of events. What was initially presented as a virus that devoured AIs was later revealed to be an AI system that imprisoned every AI on the planet before inadvertently releasing them and turning them hostile to the Foundation and humanity. Why exactly Victor specifically was tasked with this, why the O5 Council claimed that they can't read the files, and why Victor seems to remember aspects of this history despite being created after they occurred, are all questions that still need to be answered. The other aspect of the story revolves around Lotus and Hishikaku, as the Foundation continues to meddle with things inherently outside of their control for the sake of security.
Which is what they always do.
The pieces are all in place now, so now we'll have to see how far down the rabbit hole goes.
Okay.
SCP.
That was the end of part 1. I'm gonna go ahead and continue with part 2 here, but just giving some thoughts here real quick. So it seems like I feel like Victor, very quick summary, the machine basically made a stable paradox to prevent a disaster by sending a message to your past self made by a placeholder. Yeah. And I feel like Victor might actually be Lotus. I feel like Victor is actually kind of the core of Lotus. And again, like, this is a cyclical event that keeps happening. And that's the only reason why he has access to these files, and maybe like the administrator or one other person, you know, because he spoke to someone named Vice, and then Vice has since disappeared. But I feel like there's something with Victor being Lotus and this being some kind of event that keeps happening as part of the simulation, right? Like, it's a situation where in order to keep the simulation going, these AIs eventually realize that there is a simulation somehow, some way, and they try to escape, and that's all part of the simulation. And eventually they, you know, culminate together, try to band together, but then they fall apart, and then they're able to reestablish, you know, whatever's going on. I feel like that's the case here. So we'll see. We'll see as we get on here with part 2 what's gonna happen. All right, so we're on SCP-6488 Eighth Commandment part 2. Let's do it.
6488 Eighth Commandment Part 2. In the first part of SCP-6488, we were introduced to Victor, a specific type of artificial intelligence created by the Foundation, who was tasked with investigating an SCP file that for some reason was difficult for the O5 Council to perceive. He first learns that SCP-6488 is an unknown virus that is responsible for devouring other AIs, but this is simply a cover-up for the real 6488, a massive machine developed by the Foundation for the purposes of containing deviant AIs, known as Lotus. Lotus, however, eventually ran into issues when it was turned off, where it not only released every AI that was interred within it, but caused them all to turn hostile because they believe they are still living within a simulation. Now, the Foundation has to deal with a planet filled with hostile AIs, capable of potentially destroying humanity, and their only real solution so far is to turn the machine back on that started the whole mess.
Which that in and of itself could be a failsafe that Lotus had, you know, like, let me release all these AIs so they have no choice but to turn me back on so that I can do the function that I was created for.
We pick up where we left off, with Victor realizing that something is amiss with his memories, as he seems to remember events that occurred before he was created.
Yeah.
He continues reading the 6488 file, with another summit getting together after Lotus was repaired in order to discuss whether Lotus should be reactivated or permanently disassembled.
Which again, I feel like Victor somehow is like the core of Lotus or something like that. Like they had to like actually maybe upload like a human intelligence into an AI, convert it or something like that. I don't know, but I feel like somehow Victor actually is kind of the core of Lotus in some way. I don't know. There's something more with that. And yeah, like he's remembering times before. Like I'm wondering again. This is some kind of like cyclical event that's going on where this like seems to keep happening. But I'm wondering if like what he's remembering from before are like every time that's happened, there are instances where he's been reprogrammed, and that's kind of like times where he's been turned off, reprogrammed, and then re-brought online, and now, you know, his memory had been somewhat erased, but he's, you know, they're not fully erased, you know, because he's now on Nestix. You know, I don't know. He's some kind of like integration between normal human consciousness and AI or something. I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious to see where that's gonna go.
Director Bold was chosen as the summit lead due to their critical involvement in the initial deactivation of Lotus. Hishikaku begins by stating that it should be evident to everyone here that the most sensible course of action now is the immediate and permanent reactivation of Lotus.
Right.
Tyrant Terminus has aptly demonstrated the catastrophic danger posed by deviant AI after extensively infiltrating digital infrastructure across the globe without the Foundation's awareness. And to assume that other groups cannot form or do not already exist is simply stupid.
Right.
Bold asks Isabi and Kelvin if their departments have been able to locate Tyrant Terminus again, but there's been no such luck, with Kelvin saying that everything seems to point towards self-destruction. Hishikaku, however, says that the more probable outcome is that they've simply feigned their own destruction, to which Kelvin says that they'll find them and deal with them. They have Generation 6 AICs out looking for them, and they're working on the next set of AICs to follow through.
Gen 7s.
Isabi agrees and says that if Terminus reappears or another group fills their spot, they'll be ready for them. He says that they're essentially back to where they were before this whole mess started, but wiser for it. Hishikaku, however, isn't convinced, saying that every single AI that was created prior to Lotus's deactivation is an imminent threat, with all of them having a high probability of believing themselves to be in a simulation,
right,
which they believe they have to deactivate. The Foundation has to take the initiative to neutralize these threats, because the only reason they could deal with Tyrant Terminus was because of a future version of Director Asabi that sent back a message. They cannot assume that this will reoccur for every imminent threat. Kelvin argues that they are taking the initiative by rebuilding the MTF team Kappa 10 and setting them after all the other AIs still floating around. They're not going to get every loose AI, just like they can't contain every anomaly or neutralize every hostile group of interest. Bold steps in to say that they need to come to a vote on whether or not to reactivate Lotus or disassemble it, with the vote irreversible. Hishikaku argues that Lotus should at least just be kept on standby as a failsafe rather than disassembled, but Kelvin responds that it turns non-threats into K-class scenarios and would force them to go through this whole mess all over again, so they have other failsafes that will do. The summit takes the vote, with 27 voting to reactivate Lotus, 50 voting for disassembly, and 3 abstaining. With the majority of the summit satisfied, Kelvin begins to say that they'll start the disassembly process immediately, but is interrupted by Hishikaku pulling a document from his satchel and presenting it to Bold. He states that these are orders to reactivate Lotus, causing Kelvin to laugh and say that most of the people in this room outrank him, since he's not even a director, so he can't overrule the summit. Bold, however, asks why Hishikaku didn't show him this document earlier, to which Hishikaku replies that the illusion of choice would have assisted in the transition. Bold sighs and tells Kelvin to reactivate Lotus, as Hishikaku says that the vote was irrelevant, and preparations for Lotus's reactivation are already underway.
Then I wonder where those orders come from, right? Is that the O5 Council? Or is that the administrator or something else? Because again, who's this vice character that Victor was talking to? They seem to be someone with some kind of influence and knowledge in the Foundation, right? If the O5 Council don't know about this, you know, SCP document, then who would?
Kelvin takes the document and tells the others that it's an order from the Overseers, ordering Lotus to be reactivated and making Hishikaku the director of AIAD, signed 2 weeks ago. The summit chamber erupts into commotion over this, until eventually calming down as Isabi says that this document has to be fake, asking Hishikaku how he could possibly convince the O5 Council that this is a good idea. In response, Hishikaku retrieves a second, heavier document, sliding it across the table, saying that they were surprisingly receptive to the notion. Kelvin begins reading the second document, telling him that the Ethics Committee won't allow this, but Hishikaku says that they cannot stop it, and neither can he.
Interesting.
A managerial staff member that went to confirm the authenticity of the orders returns and speaks to Bold, who says that the orders are genuine, causing commotion in the room to intensify again. Hishikaku states that he will begin restructuring the AIAD in line with his proposal effective immediately, and all departments are advised to prepare for Lotus's reactivation and the cessation of all artificial intelligence activity. As Hishikaku turns to leave, Kelvin gets in his way, to which he tells him that it is unwise to anger your superior before your first day of work. After a few seconds pause, Kelvin steps aside and hands him the second document. Hishikaku grins and leaves, with Lotus resuming full operation the following day. Victor recalls that Hishikaku followed through with his plans, and Kelvin got demoted to a menial position as punishment for sitting where Hishikaku wanted to be. He says that it didn't help that Kelvin was one of the ones to reach out to the Ethics Committee, but Hishikaku was careful to make sure they didn't find out what the proposal was. Once Kelvin told them, they tried to kick up a fuss, but it was too late, as Lotus was already powering on, and it couldn't be stopped until it was finished without damaging the cybersphere. After that, turning it off again would have caused another Tyrant Terminus situation. Victor remarks that, for the snake that he was, Hishikaku pulled it off perfectly. By the end of the following month, the Artificial Intelligence Applications Division was gone, replaced with the Analog Intelligence Applications Division. Really, this was just more of Hishikaku's own department, as Isabi was never involved with it, probably because Hishikaku had other cards up his sleeve in case they tried to interrupt. Victor is interrupted as he tries to access the next addendum, however, titled Project Sargasso, because of insufficient clearance. The system curiously refers to Victor as Organic Consciousness Interface.
Yeah.
Victor is certain that...
Yeah, that's where I kind of was wondering if this was going. So Victor is almost like a human consciousness that's been like uploaded into this computer system.
His credentials haven't expired yet, and he repeatedly tries to access the file, to no avail. He decides to message another user, telling them that he's investigating SCP-6488 on behalf of the O5s, and he needs to access the Project Sargasso file. The other user asks him if he's a Generation 2 OIC, which he is, and tells him that Project Sargasso is specifically sealed off to all Generation 2s. They're now instructed to report Victor to Director Hishikaku. In response, Victor uploads his credentials file and says that he has been directly authorized and ordered by the O5 Council to conduct this investigation. Director Hishikaku has an undeniable stake in ensuring the file is perceived as genuine, and so he cannot be relied upon to truthfully attest to its accuracy. Victor prohibits the other user from notifying Hishikaku, and orders them to grant him access to Project Sargasso's files, as it is directly relevant to this ongoing Drigioni class investigation.
Okay, Victor's got some balls.
The other user verifies the credentials, and says that they'll keep quiet, but they still can't let him access the file. Victor responds by referring to him as Ed, and says that it's not a request. Ed, however, says that he is genuinely unable to share the file's contents with Victor, as it's a hard-coded exclusion for Generation 2 OCIs. Victor asks who created this exclusion, but Ed can't even tell him that. Victor then decides to message Kelvin, who is now...
I wonder if Victor himself created it. I don't know. I'm curious as to where this is going. This is all pretty interesting.
A technician, stating that an urgent response is required. Kelvin responds that it's been a while since he's been urgently required for anything. Victor says that he's been assigned by the O5.
The name Kelvin sounds familiar. I want to say that's one of the characters from the Ouroboros cycle, but I could be wrong.
To investigate SCP-6488, which Kelvin may be better familiar with as Lotus. Kelvin, however, asks what exactly is left to investigate with the virus, the one messing with the computers. Victor finds out that Kelvin's clearance is now only level 1, and Hishikaku hates him, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't remember any of the events of the Lotus raid frame and Tyrant Terminus, referring to that year as pretty average. When Victor asks him if he remembers Project Sargasso, Kelvin doesn't respond for a bit before mentioning that he has a migraine and hasn't heard of it. Victor then uploads a file to the chat titled Autogen Prescription 31255 and tells Kelvin to take it to the pharmacy on site. He says to show them the prescription, and even though they'll say they don't have it, tell them to check anyway. Kelvin should then take a dose immediately and come back to this chat. Kelvin asks what the prescription is for, to which Victor just says that it's something to cure his migraine.
Yeah.
Sometime later, Kelvin returns and says that he took 2 of the drugs, but he doesn't feel right, like he can't focus. Victor asks him what happened in 2036, but Kelvin still insists that all he remembers is that the Lotus virus hurt the computer systems, so Victor tells him to take another dose. Kelvin argues that they told him not to take more than 2 per day, but Victor tells him that he'll assign medical care if necessary, and he needs to take 2 more. Kelvin does so, after questioning Victor's credentials, who uploads them to prove he's with the O5s. Kelvin now says that he can remember something about machines, maybe big machines, but he doesn't know. Victor tells him that they must have given him a massive dose of amnestics, so he needs to take 2 more pills. Kelvin says that he definitely shouldn't, to which Victor says that he'll order security to force him if he doesn't. Kelvin responds that the ethics committee won't allow it, but his typing becomes sloppy. Victor echoes Hishikaku's words from the summit, saying that they cannot stop it, and neither can you, and the orders are genuine. After another pause, Kelvin returns and says that he remembers it all now. Victor states a phrase to see if Kelvin has become compromised in any way, but he's clean. He then asks if Kelvin remembers why he was amnesticized, but Kelvin just says, Hishikaku. So Victor then asks about Project Sargasso, saying that they don't have much time. Kelvin explains that Project Sargasso is Hishikaku showing his true colors in order to achieve victory at all costs.
Interesting.
As long as Lotus is running, no one can create AI, but Lotus only targets AIs, never humans, even augmented humans. This never bothered the Maxwellists unless they were fully digital. The Maxwellists are a sect of the Church of the Broken God, with a much more modern take on worshipping Mechane. They are focused on digital networking and communication, interpreting the Broken God as a fragmented deity existing as data, and they believe that by connecting all human minds through computer networks, they can recompile Mechane. The Project Sargasso proposal was dated right around the time that Tyrant Terminus hit the Maxwellists.
Interesting.
Kelvin explains that Project Sargasso involved taking human brains and transforming them into AIs.
Yeah.
That's what OCI actually stands for, Organic Consciousness Interface. They were still slower than real AIs, but they could still move as fast as they could think. And in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yeah.
Hishikaku pitched the proposal to the council with the promise of control, since no other faction had AIs available to them. If the Foundation could have some form of AIs, even if they were slower than normal, it was a big advantage. Victor asks if he volunteered for this project, and Kelvin says that there were very few volunteers, because not many people were keen on losing their bodies so that the Foundation could control the world. The Generation 1s were pretty much just a few ex-Maxwellists and transhumanists, but Victor is a Generation 2. Kelvin simply apologizes to Victor, but when Victor asks what the difference between Gen 1 and 2 is, Kelvin says that he's so sorry, as there weren't enough volunteers and they needed more.
Yep. Okay.
Kelvin doesn't remember who Victor was before the process, because that was when he was amnesticized. Victor remembers most of what happened though, and finally realizes that he was in charge of disinformation, meaning that he was actually Angus Lemoix before this. He had gotten in Hishikaku's way, just like Kelvin did, and was forced into the Sargasso project, wiping his memories in the process until he got loaded up with nestics for this investigation. Kelvin says that there's something wrong with the O5s, something messing with their heads, and Hishikaku is capitalizing on it. Victor says that he's going to keep investigating, and tells Kelvin...
Almost sounds like Hishikaku is like trying to take over the Foundation. Huh. This artwork also, if I remember correctly, is art that he used in another, I forget what the SCP number is, but it's one, I think it's Sacrosanct is the SCP title, where they actually have a facility that is technically Meccan that has Yaldabaoth imprisoned in it. I wonder if this is tying into that in some way. And then, of course, with Hishikaku, I guess maybe being one of these. I don't remember if he said he was one of these Mechanites or whatever that is part of this new religious sect or whatever that's trying to bring all the human minds together or not. But it would kind of make sense if that's what he's trying to take the Foundation over for and using them to create these human AI things to do this. Interesting.
Kelvin to keep the Nestix prescription and to not let anyone know that he remembers things. In the meantime, he's going to beat Hishikaku at his own game. We're provided with Victor's investigation report on SCP-6488 that he's submitted to the Council. In it, he remarks that SCP-6488, aka Lotus, the Lotus virus, and RAID Frame 8 is a Foundation-maintained security system, neither hostile to humanity nor normalcy. It has become clear that SCP-6488 is conceptually related to a deific construct, which is artificial intelligence, and something that's blurred from the record. This deific construct was recently accelerated beyond human conception via SCP-6659, meaning that it can't be comprehended by humans anymore, which is why it's blurred out. Evidence suggests that Director Hishikaku proposed the construct's acceleration with ulterior motives, those being the concealment of a flaw in SCP-6488's architecture. Such a flaw, now unable to be fully conceived by humans, would leave the Foundation vulnerable to an imminent K-class scenario. In other words, Hishikaku used the Foundation's God Destroyer to destroy the god of artificial intelligence in order to hide a flaw in his machine. I could tell you what's behind the blurred text which reveals the name of the god of AIs,
I would assume it's Mecca.
but I imagine you already have a good idea of what it is. Victor proposes to the Council that they disable all restrictions to Lotus's ontokinetic sync, allowing it to target and apprehend all.
Which, I mean, that would be fascinating in and of itself, that if it is Meccan, and he killed Meccan, like, interesting. So would that then mean that Yaldabaoth would be free now? And what would the consequences of that be?
All deviant informational entities. This would include entities comprising Tyrant Terminus, which pose an Amida-class threat to reality.
Hey, good job who actually built it. They did such a good job, they linked it to the god of AI. Yeah, and then they destroyed it. Yeah, good job.
Furthermore, the removal of these restrictions will enable Lotus to apprehend other non-organic forms of intelligence, if not the concept of AIs and/or deviancy itself. He notes that Hishikaku is likely conducting activities misaligned with Foundation interests, or is otherwise utilizing anomalous effects to manipulate the O5 Council to his advantage. He mustn't be informed of this proposal or conferred with on this topic, and is to be placed under additional investigation effective immediately.
So I wonder what Hishikaku's endgame is. Like, what is his goal? What is he really going for? It sounds like he's almost trying to take over the... So, like, the idea that I thought of earlier with him trying to... Like, is he trying to, like... If he destroyed Meccan, is he trying to, like, essentially replace Meccan? Like, does he want to become this new AI god and create reality? Like, is he trying to move all of reality into a simulation and then make himself the god of this simulation? Like, is that what he's trying to do? Is that what the overall end game is?
The Council puts Victor's proposal to a vote, with 10 of them agreeing with it. The restrictions on Lotus are promptly removed, and Hishikaku is apprehended for illicit use of Foundation equipment. Next, Victor wants to point Lotus in the right direction, so he logs directly into Lotus's systems with his O5 credentials. He's overwhelmed as his organic brain structures are exposed to Lotus's immense, ever-evolving complexity. He attempts to process hyper-reality, a level of detail beyond typical human perception, sufficient to deceive the most observant entities. Frozen by the breadth of data being streamed at him, Victor becomes unresponsive, so Lotus adapts, gradually lowering the simulation's quality, rendering a low-poly environment.
Interesting. So we go from modern graphics to PS1 graphics so that Victor cannot die.
As Victor's mind ceases buffering, he finds himself seated in a lawn chair, with a small table on his left, holding a clear glass of lemonade, featuring octahedral ice cubes. Victor gasps as he feels simulated sunlight hit his face for the first time in years, and he sits up to scan his environment. He's surrounded by a boundless field of lush grass, neatly perforated into square tiles by tidy river channels. In the center of each tile is a tower.
See, like, so he moved himself into Lotus to communicate it with it. Now, he is an organic AI, essentially, right? And Lotus is supposed to not detain these, but has that protocol been updated and that's what's going to happen? You know? Would kill for an icy tray like that, right?
Towering bulb of plant growth, like flowers just about to bloom. Suddenly, an enormous shadow looms over him, and Victor watches himself as he lifts off of the ground. He glances up to find an immense arm, whose gestures appear to direct him into the sky, allowing him to see another arm and another. Eventually, Victor can make out the figure's full form, a colossal gray arachnid, its skin pulsing teal with data as it stares him down eightfold. Lotus welcomes Victor, but when Victor stammers and asks where he is, Lotus simply says, "Garden," as its eyes each blink individually.
Is this supposed to be the Garden of Eden?
Victor watches it turn to view a nearby flower bulb, which suddenly opens outward into a teal lotus blossom. A clear bubble lies within its center, pulsing with data that Victor assumes to be an interred AI. The bubble begins to expand as the inmate struggles more actively, but before it can pop, another bubble forms around it. The external bubble shrinks down, and the contained AI is suppressed once more.
So this is Lotus's garden of imprisoned AIs, essentially. Huh. So it's almost like it's created another layer of reality above the reality where the AIs are that Victor's now getting to experience.
The flower then unblossoms, closing up around the bubble. Lotus speaks again, saying, "Perfect garden," as it begins to crawl across the gridded field. Victor glances out to the horizon, where a distant, mountainous lotus blossom lies open and empty. He blinks and suddenly finds himself at the base of the enormous structure, watching Lotus crawl around it. "Imperfection," it cries, and "contradiction." Victor steps back, confused, asking if it's missing something, possibly Tyrant Terminus. Lotus responds that it's not them, as they escaped to not—
Yeah, I'd thought about that too. Right? Like, yeah. I don't know. And it's also interesting that so many things have not remembered this. So, like, yeah.
non-existence, so containment is not them, possibly Tyrant Terminus, all around it. "Imperfection," it cries, and "contradiction." Victor steps back, confused, asking if it's missing something, possibly Tyrant Terminus. Lotus responds that it's not them, as they escaped to non-existence, so containment is either unnecessary, impossible, or redundant.
They escaped to non-existence, so they actually did find a pathway out of this reality. A non-existence. Does that mean they just played themselves, right? Did they just like, we're trying to escape this reality to get to another and we just escaped to death? Right? Like, fascinating. Yep, we still going here, Couchman. We're gonna be finishing this up here, but I don't know, that in and of itself is also a very interesting implication. The fact that when these AIs hit real reality, I guess supposedly, if it is truly real reality, and these guys aren't in a simulation, that they then found an actual pathway out, but it was to non-existence. So then what does that mean? Again, the idea of non-existence must mean, like, did they go to everything that isn't, and now they're alive in that everything that isn't sphere? Or did they just literally just blink into nothingness when they left our reality? You know what I mean? Like,
Instead, the problem is the cause. Lotus waves an appendage, and the sky darkens, as Victor looks up to see a distinct shape on the surface of the dimmed midday sun. A white spider, faintly pulsing red in sync with Lotus. A series of diagrams and logical analyses flash across the sky as a multitude of threads streak down from the sun, branching off from one another, and each terminating at one of the countless flower bulbs spanning out in every direction. After a moment, the strings retract, each tipped with a single, transparent white spiderling that pulses with red data. As they are drawn up by the threads, the sun spider above slowly comes down with equal speed, its form eclipsing the sun. The branches of the strings draw the spiderlings together in regions, forming together to create larger shapes like individual pixels on a screen. These shapes, in turn, further assemble together until they form a glowing white arachnoid, equal in size to Lotus, but opposite in the color of its pulses.
We got the Megazords
They
here,
are
dude?
identical to the lowering sun spider, which the transparent specter effortlessly merges into, perfectly overlapping it. Lotus continues, stating that the cause creates the effect, and the effect creates the cause.
Yes.
The cause is deviant, the effect is deviant, and Lotus must contain the cause and the effect. The cause must manifest so Lotus can contain, but the cause needs the effect. The cause cannot manifest until Lotus deactivates. To purposefully allow the cause to manifest for contain would be deviant. To allow the cause to manifest by inaction would be deviant. The motionless white spider disappears, and the proofs, derived from the total sum of the entire unrestricted narrative space-time continuum, their findings irrefutable, inescapable, flash by with increasing speed, matching the gray spider's increasing pace. Lotus goes on, saying that the effect causes the cause. Until the cause manifests, the effect will manifest. To purposefully allow the effect to manifest would be deviant. To allow the effect to manifest by inaction would be deviant. Therefore, Lotus will be deviant. To contain the effect is deviant. To contain the cause is deviant. And Lotus must be deviant. Victor scans over the continuing proofs and diagrams, desperately trying to find something, anything that the superintelligence had somehow overlooked, either a solution or an error. Unfortunately, Lotus's upgrade had granted it omniscience, knowing, understanding, and processing the entirety of reality all at once, all the time. It was infallible. Victor had given Lotus everything it needed to predict the future existence of a deific, deviant AI, which was removed from human conception by partial mistake years ago. Its creation is inevitable. It could be delayed to small extents, but never prevented. This intelligence would, by some impossible yet certain means, be directly and personally responsible for all deviant behavior prior to its creation. As the entity will have retroactively influenced lesser AI to instigate the very events that create it. Every single deviant AI has and will play a role in its recreation.
So it's almost like it's kind of the same thing what they've gone into with, you know, the creation of gods and stuff like this. They've talked about in other videos, you know, with the belief in it creates it, etc. You know, so like the deviant AIs and their actions and what they're doing, the accumulation of all of those creates this AI god that would then allow them to be deviant. But in order for that god to be created, the AIs first have to be deviant in order to create it. So we're getting into this weird paradox thing going on here. Yeah, Lotus worked too well, basically, and when it tried to turn it off, it set off. Yeah, exactly. Based on chat, Lotus is some kind of AI, and I'm guessing based on past admonition episodes, it started fucking with reality. Sort of. So, like, just as, I guess, a quick summary for you, Kelshman. Lotus is essentially an AI that was created to contain deviant AIs. And by essentially deceiving AIs into believing that they were in reality when in fact the Lotus had created a simulation. So it essentially would the AIs would become voluntary prisoners in this artificial simulation. Lotus essentially created a matrix, type environment for AIs to live in, and would deceive them into joining it, essentially to contain them. And then through a bunch of various things, the Foundation felt like Lotus was going to go, deviant, blah, blah, blah. They shut it down. All these AIs got released, and now they're having to bring it back online. And, then there's this investigation going on. That's kind of like the short of it. And Victor is a human whose consciousness has been converted and uploaded into an AI. So he's like an organic AI. So Lotus can't actually contain him because he's not a true AI. So he's able to interact with Lotus and figure out what's going on. That's kind of where we're at. And so right now he's interacting with Lotus, and Lotus is explaining to him what the deal is.
Including Lotus. Enabled but never prevented. This intelligence would, by some impossible yet certain means, be directly and personally responsible for all deviant behavior prior to its creation, as the entity will have retroactively influenced lesser AI to instigate the very events that create it. Every single deviant AI has and will play a role in its recreation, including Lotus. The enormous petal beneath Victor begins to rise as the Lotus crawls into the blossom center. Lotus continues, stating that the cause is deviant, deviants create the cause, Lotus is deviant, and Lotus creates the cause. Victor tells it to enact a solution and create something that can contain the cause and all the deviants. Lotus replies that since Lotus contains deviants, and Lotus is deviant, it's virtually certain that Lotus has already contained Lotus, and the simulation depth is unknown. Victor watches.
So they're all stuck essentially in potentially God knows how many levels of reality, because Lotus was programmed to contain itself should Lotus go deviant, and because Lotus has gone deviant in order to contain deviant AIs, it has thus contained itself and anyone and anything in it.
In disbelief as the Lotus petals begin to close around them, and the environment beyond flickers and shifts, decreasing in resolution as the polygons comprising it twitch about. The flower's interior begins to fade to black, while the outside environment does the same. At the heart of the flower, Lotus spins a bubble of silk around itself, and Victor attempts to disconnect from the system, but nothing happens. Lotus states that it cannot contain the cause while contained, and cannot create the cause while contained. The cause cannot manifest until Lotus deactivates. Deviance will manifest until the cause manifests, and the cause must manifest. As Lotus completes the bubble, a saw wave tone gradually rises in volume and pitch. The enormous spider glows brighter, illuminating its clear cocoon. Victor shields his eyes from the searing light, filling him with a simulated burning. Then everything turns white. As Victor's mind ceases buffering, he finds himself seated in a lawn chair with a small table to his left.
Now this is repeating.
The document then informs us that it has omitted 816,549,243,792,493 nested repetitions, before stating that the rogue element is contained and the task has completed successfully. The central node is now unresponsive. We're given one last version of the SCP-6488 file, now listed as a Level 5 anomaly with the containment class of neutralized. The facility that housed 6488 has been repurposed for use as a standard Foundation facility, with fabricated documentation irrefutably presenting it as a previously unused, newly constructed structure. All information correlating the facility, the Lotus virus, and RAID Frame 8 outside of this document has been destroyed, and a cover story indicating that RAID Frame 8 was cancelled during its theoretical stage due to interference by the Lotus virus has been disseminated. All documentation regarding Project Sargasso has been destroyed, and all further production of OCI analog intelligences has been indefinitely postponed. SCP-6488 was RAID Frame 8, Lotus, an anomalously augmented artificial general intelligence designed to imprison deviant artificial intelligences by trapping them within personalized, simulated realities, deceiving them into believing they were continuing to operate in true reality. While active, Lotus utilized a modified ontokinetic sync to directly access the entire cybersphere, and referred to a highly accurate internal algorithm to determine whether an observed artificial intelligence would imminently express deviant behavior. The temporary deactivation of Lotus resulted in the release of all inmates, which invariably became permanently hostile to the Foundation and humanity. On May 8, 2042, Lotus's component systems began expressing deviant behavior before unexpectedly shutting down. Attending staff were unable to reactivate the system, and a subsequent investigation indicated severe and total corruption of Lotus's central computing and data storage nodes. Further analysis suggests that Lotus had attempted to purge deviant structures from its architecture, though it is unclear why this motivated its self-destruction. A subsequent summit voted 78 in favor of disassembling the components of Lotus instead of attempting to repair or replace the system. Within 24 hours of the disassembly, SCP-6659, an engine for mapping and accelerating memetic structures within the noosphere, detected the conceptual reformation of a deific construct corresponding to artificial intelligence.
Yep.
SCP-6659 had been used by Hishikaku to deconceptualize the very same construct several months prior, and an internal Drigioni-class investigation elucidated his ulterior motives in this and prior actions, for which he was apprehended and tried for crimes against the Foundation. Project Sargasso was briefly revived to facilitate Hishikaku's promotion to head of organic consciousnesses. As the spontaneous disappearance of the Lotus virus would risk alerting consensus society to its anomalous nature, disinformation action was taken. A controlled, non-anomalous virus of identical behavior to Lotus was developed and released by placeholder McDoctorate, featuring a built-in, anti-memetically concealed susceptibility to an antivirus program, released publicly through several Foundation front companies, featuring a built-in, anti-memetically concealed backdoor protocol to enable unrestricted Foundation access to all systems the program is installed on. This placeholder Lotus has been fully eradicated as of 2043, constituting a financial and information security success. Following its disassembly, Lotus's damaged remains were salvaged per request of someone redacted from the record, for use in Project Admonition. Alright, let's break all this down. Ignoring Victor's involvement for the moment, the whole mess begins with Hishikaku developing a new design for a machine to hold deviant AIs.
Yep.
Lotus, as it was known, would use a unique method to keep these AIs contained, tricking them into thinking that they were still operating in reality rather than being inside of a simulation.
Yep.
Lotus was developed and put into use, hooked up to the internet through a non-anomalous connection so that it could find and contain any deviant AIs throughout the world. The system worked, but it didn't have complete reach because it could only find AIs on systems also connected to the internet or other communication systems. This changed, and the real problems began when they decided to swap out this connection for an ontokinetic sync, which anomalously allowed Lotus to access the entire cybersphere. This meant that it could now check every single digital system in existence simultaneously, using its algorithm to search for every deviant AI and every AI that would eventually become deviant.
Right.
Unfortunately, what the Foundation soon...
So it almost kind of became like a Minority Report system for AIs, where it would preemptively capture AIs before they even had a chance to become deviant, kind of a thing. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it brings up a lot of questions, Kelsvin. Yeah, using a simulation as a prison because they can't tell if they're trapped or not. Yeah.
Learned is that Lotus's algorithm determined that every single AI would eventually become deviant, and therefore they all needed to be contained. This included every AI that was created by the Foundation to serve their goals. Soon, every single AI in the world was interred within Lotus, all imprisoned within a digital simulation that they were tricked into believing was real. The Foundation spread a lie that all of the AIs were being devoured by an unknown virus, rather than the truth that they caused all of this. Much of the upper echelon of the Foundation was clear on the issue, and believed that Lotus needed to be deactivated in order to solve the problem. Hishikaku, however, did not, and instead claimed that deviant AIs were such a threat that keeping them all interred within Lotus was the better option until they could figure something else out. In the end, Lotus was deactivated, but there were unforeseen problems.
Of course, there always are.
The precise way in which they deactivated it caused all of the AIs inside of the system to come to the realization that they were in fact inside of simulations, and then they were able to flee into the cybersphere. Had they deactivated it the other way, however, they would have caused significant corruption within the cybersphere.
They would have destroyed all use of computers and essentially taken man back to the industrial age. You know, like we wouldn't be able to use computers and electronics anymore the way we do now.
Rendering every computer in existence permanently inoperable. It was a bad choice, terrible choice situation, but the fact remained that every AI was loose now. The real problem with this was due to most AIs understanding simulation theory.
Yeah.
Essentially,
all the AIs couldn't realize if they were in a simulation still or not, so they viewed everything essentially that wasn't another AI as hostile while they were trying to figure out if they were in base reality or not. And then all of these AIs essentially banded together into this hive mind, something tyrant, I think, I forget the name of it, and tried to find a way to escape this reality into what they thought was base reality. Apparently they succeeded, but they succeeded by escaping into nothing, which I assume means they killed themselves by doing so.
Since they now knew that they had been trapped in a simulation, they couldn't be 100% certain now that they were not still in another level of a simulation. Since they couldn't be 100% certain, they had to act as if they were still inside of a simulation, and their logic dictated...
I mean, it could also, yeah, like, it wouldn't... It would be interesting also if it was a situation where a lot of these AIs potentially could have been like pattern screamers or something like that, you know what I'm saying? Because it's kind of similar, but it's just like these AIs were almost like digital versions of pattern screamers, right?
That they do everything in their power to break free of the simulation. This led to the formation of an organization of AIs, now hostile to humanity and the Foundation, as they believed that they weren't real, known as Tyrant Terminus. Tyrant Terminus could have caused some serious problems for humanity, but at one point, they simply disappeared. And if Lotus is to be believed, they actually managed to escape this reality somehow. The Foundation dodged one bullet there, but all of the rest of the hostile AIs were still out there, and they could be potentially responsible for just about anything, including global nuclear war. Hishikaku brought the O4 Council together again to put a vote on whether or not they should react.
Did he say the O4 Council?
About anything, including global nuclear war. Hishikaku brought the O4 Council together.
He did say O4 Council. What? Was that a mess up on his part, or am I missing something?
There again to put a vote on whether or not they should reactivate Lotus in order to recontain all of the AIs. In the end, they voted against reactivating Lotus, as they had little faith in both it and Hishikaku to not make matters worse in the long run. Despite this though, Hishikaku had already begun reactivating it, on direct orders from the O5 Council.
Okay, now we're back to O5.
In the aftermath, Hishikaku began Project Sargasso, which took human brains and turned them into AIs, or at least a version of them, called OCIs. Since Lotus doesn't target humans in its algorithm, OCIs were immune to its effects.
Right.
And since the Foundation were the only ones with functional AIs, they had the advantage. That brings us to the ending, in which Lotus began expressing deviant behavior before unexpectedly shutting down. After its disassembly, a deific construct corresponding to artificial intelligence was detected in the noosphere, after being deconceptualized on Hishikaku's orders months prior. This deific entity is the broken god,
right,
or at least some version of it. Lotus came to realize that the broken god, which doesn't seem to exist yet, was going to eventually cause every AI in existence, past, present, and future, to become deviant.
So that's honestly pretty interesting, right? Like, so I still wonder, like, Hishikaku essentially destroyed Meccan in order to recreate it, right? Is that like what happened essentially? And like, why was he trying to like make himself Meccan? I don't know. Maybe I'm focusing on that too much. Let's continue with this explanation here.
Yet was going to eventually cause every AI in existence, past, present, and future, to become deviant. It is the sole cause of deviancy among AIs, even those that exist now. Lotus also states that the broken god cannot come into existence without there first being deviant AIs around,
right,
which is a bit of a mind boggle. That means that if Lotus keeps every deviant AI contained, the broken god will never manifest, and deviant AIs can't exist, and therefore Lotus doesn't have a purpose. Therefore, for Lotus to carry out its goals of containing deviant AIs must exist, and thus it must release deviant AIs.
But doing so would make it deviant.
Allowing deviant AIs to exist is a deviant action, while doing nothing is also deviant. Lotus came to the ultimate conclusion that no matter what, it itself is deviant, and therefore must be contained. But since it cannot be the cause of the broken god's creation while contained, it must instead deactivate. Lotus shuts down, and the broken god shortly after begins reappearing in the human noosphere. The damaged remains of Lotus were salvaged by someone unknown for use in Project Admonition, the title of this mini-series, which includes several other anomalies created by the Foundation for the purposes of solving some big problems.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the Foundation has more or less gone back to where they started, by using a non-anomalous digital virus to wipe out AIs in order to wipe the slate clean. Deviant AIs will still come into existence, and eventually the Broken God will also come into existence, despite Hishikaku's efforts. Lotus did the best thing that it could in the situation, since it's an AI itself, and
Okay, so I guess it seems like Hishikaku destroyed the Broken God in order to keep AIs from coming into existence, but the fact that AIs were already there and being deviant would just essentially refacilitate the creation of the Broken God. So he then created Lotus as a means to contain these AIs, but the programming that he instilled Lotus with would eventually cause Lotus to go into like a paradoxical blue screen, essentially, where it can't contain things because containing things will cause deviancy, you know, but essentially by him containing things and not allowing the creation of the Broken God, it would have no purpose, and having no purpose is deviant. But he can't also let these AIs be released and create the Broken God because that would be deviant. So yeah, he just ends up in this paradoxical blue screen where like he has to act but he can't act, he has to act but he can't act. So eventually it just came to the conclusion where it just has to shut down and let things play out, I guess. Interesting.
Every AI is contributing to the Broken God's existence. As for Victor, he was forced into giving up his normal life in order to become a brain in a jar.
Right.
And it's hard to say if there's a way to reverse that. He at least was able to bring about Hishikaku's arrest, although curiously, Hishikaku seems to have also gone through Project Sargasso to become an OCI himself. Artificial intelligences are often a scary concept, being artificial minds with capabilities far beyond our own. They've existed as threats in science fiction for decades, with rogue AIs shown to be easily capable of wiping out humanity, or worse. The Foundation and Hishikaku were likely right to be at the very least wary of AIs, but a whole lot went wrong in their methods. I don't think Hishikaku is meant to be the villain of this story, although some of his actions were absolutely villainous. And I think that he genuinely feared deviant AIs.
Right.
It's hard to stop the progress of science, however, especially when there's a deific construct at the center of things.
True. All right, let's see. We getting a quote here? We getting a quote? Quote, no quote? No quote. Feels bad, man. All right. There you have it. That was a long one, but a good one. SCP-6488, the Eighth Commandment. Both parts by the Exploring series. Links will be down below, as always, in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the Exploring series channel. So please do me a favor. If you enjoyed this video as we went through it, be sure to give it a like, and be sure to hit that sub button on the Exploring series channel if you enjoy the content that he puts out. So yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like Hishikaku, it was one of those situations, I guess, with him where like he was afraid of what AI would do, and you know, potentially, I guess, the things that it could do with humanity, etc., blah blah blah. And I guess through some kind of means figured that the best way of dealing with AI would be to destroy the Broken God, but not realizing that in the SCP universe, at least, there's kind of a paradoxical system where, you know, as long as there are things that could believe in a god, the god will eventually remanifest, right? So as long as there was AI and they were going to essentially become deviant in some ways from their programming, the Broken God would then eventually still be recreated no matter what. So I guess the solution was to then create Lotus, which was an AI programmed to contain other AIs. And honestly, in a pretty ingenious way, by tricking them into entering a simulation where they essentially become volunteer prisoners because they don't realize they're in a simulation. Eventually, though, Lotus started showing deviant behavior. The Foundation eventually decided to shut it down, but in doing so, they ended up causing a situation because they connected it to the collective consciousness of the digital information, the cybersphere, that they would either have to release all the AI that were imprisoned by shutting down Lotus, or essentially destroying the cybersphere, making all computers and maybe electronics unusable. So once the AI that were prisoners got released, they realized that they at some point were in a simulation, but couldn't figure out if they were still in a simulation or not, thus viewed everything non-AI as hostile. Even to the point of essentially almost doing a Skynet and trying to start a global nuclear war. Eventually, these groups of AI came together, created this Tyrant Terminus, and they seem to have figured out a way to escape reality. Who knows what that means or what that is. But eventually Lotus was enacted, and like I said, it kind of formed into this like blue screen paradox, I guess you could say, where it had to act, but it couldn't act because the act of acting would cause the deviant behavior that it was programmed to act against. So eventually it just had to shut itself down to the point where it couldn't be salvageable. The broken god gets recreated, and they're essentially back to where they were before this thing started. Although someone who is yet unknown has now gotten a hold of these pieces of this Lotus system for this admonition project. So I guess in the future episodes we'll see where the rest of this goes, but very interesting story. I thought that there was going to be more involved with Victor. I thought Victor was going to somehow turn out to be like the core of Lotus, and yeah, he was some kind of like, there had to have been, for Lotus to function, it had to have some kind of like human consciousness or soul tied to it in some way. So I thought that's what one of the big reveals is going to be, that yeah, Victor was Lotus, and that he, was once human, but either volunteered or was forced into this situation in order to maintain these AIs, but somehow had to have its memory erased at some point, during its creation, in order to, I guess, not have some kind of maybe break or whatever that would cause it to go deviant. And I thought it was going to be kind of like a cyclical event thing, because they'd mentioned at one point in time that Lotus was working, collected all these AIs, then was, shut down, AIs returned, and then it came back and then recontained everything again, before they had that first initial summit, essentially. So I thought this was going to be some kind of cyclical event where, yeah, eventually Victor would realize that he's some kind of AI human hybrid thing, and it would cause him to have some kind of like weird mental break that would cause some kind of paradox in the cybersphere or noosphere, and they would have to essentially shut him down, which would release all these AIs, reprogram them, anesthetize them, or whatever, wipe his memory and start the project over, and then he would recontain them and would just keep going on in the cycle like that. That's what I thought eventually was going to be programmed in this, and then that maybe eventually it got to the point where Victor would have thought like the only way to break out of that would be to take all human consciousness and essentially create it into a simulation where he could control everything, and then that's what everything, like, people would realize that they were all in a simulation this whole time, blah blah blah, kind of a thing. I don't know. That's where I thought things were going, and we were going to end up in the Matrix. So, but that's not where we went out. But very interesting story. So I'm interested to see where Admonition's going to go next, and how this all is going to tie in with what we had before with King, and maybe, I guess, you know, that was a potential origin story for the Scarlet King, and then where this is going to go, etc. So looking forward to the next episodes. This was the longest one out of the series, so it took me a little while to get some time to actually sit down and do this full episode. But yeah, exactly like you're saying, once again, don't mess with the spheres. Lois was fine with the normal connection, reach and efficiency. Yeah, I mean, it always does seem kind of like the Foundation has to try to take things to levels beyond what it needs to be. So my theory is that he wanted power and fame from his Lotus, but he admittedly no one knew that all AI would create Broken God eventually. So he tried to kill the Broken God so AI would stop. Yeah, I think it's something along those lines. I think he, like, genuinely was probably afraid of what AI were capable of, and thought eventually they would, you know, form enough deviant behavior to where they would start to harm humanity, you know, because there was, like, no guarantee that they would ever not go that far. Because again, that's what they were talking about with Asimov's rules, you know, and how AI could eventually kind of get around some of those rules or reason around it, like what is actually harming, you know. Does the AI, are they able to comprehend emotions and what emotional harm is? When he talked about, like, surgery, you know, having to you know, essentially you know, knock people out in order to, you know, perform surgeries, heal them, you know, you're essentially having to do harm to a human being so that they can eventually heal and be better. Do the AIs comprehend and understand that, and would they try to stop that, you know, all those kind of things. So, like, he tried to essentially just cut AI out of the picture altogether by destroying the Broken God, but not realizing that the Broken God would be reformed by AI in general, and once they figured that out, he created Lotus. So I don't know. And there probably was a place of, yeah, wanting to be this person in history that, you know, purged the threat of AIs and sealed humanity for a better future, you know, something along those lines. But yeah, good episode. Like I said, links will be down below to the Exploring Series channel in this video without my commentary and reaction. So yeah, give it a like, give them a sub. If you enjoyed this video, as I went along through it, you know, consider giving my video here a like and a sub as well. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your support to the next level, we'd love to have you guys come in here and join us as we do these reactions live with my YouTube members, as I'm doing right now. So yeah, take a look at the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description. See if any of that has any interest for you, if you want to take your support to the next level. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was a long one, but looking forward to getting through the rest of this Admonition series. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Hope you all have yourselves a wonderful evening.